Hey Plebeian viewers, and welcome back to Crypt Day. Alright, see that? We got a logo now. Isn't that cool? This is the video series where I do deep dives into the artists you love or maybe that you've never even heard of and relay the information back to you in an easily digestible and hopefully fun way. So without further ado, let's crack into it. I wonder if this is going to be like my thing. The subject for this week's video is Francisco Goya. And Goya is a really cool subject because he's in one way the last great master painter and in another way one of the first truly modern artists. You've undoubtedly heard of Goya's work before, but let's go all the way back to the beginning. Goya was born in 1746 in the remote Asturian town of Fuendetodos, which is in Spain. I didn't know that. Little is known about the specifics of the man behind his incredible body of work, but we know he began studying painting at the age of 14 under Spanish Baroque painter José Luzán y Martínez, or just José Luzán. Heads up now, there's quite a bit of Spanish in this video, and my Spanish isn't very good. Under Luzán, he copied stamps for 4 years until he decided that he wanted to work on his own. So Goya headed to Madrid to study under Anton Raphael Mengs, but he clashed with his master, and this entire period of his work didn't really go well for Goya. His first two stints in Madrid in 1763 and 1766 were rather unimportant and were kind of documented as such. We don't really know much about his trip to Italy in 1770 either, but while the trips weren't super developmental for his own body of work, we can assume that seeing the great masterworks of Spain and Italy was rather influential of Goya's work. This becomes significant because as he caught his first decent break in 1770, which came in the form of second place in the competition of the Academy at Parma. He returned to Saragossa in 1771, where he obtained the commission for the Church of Santa Maria del Pilar, which he did in the Baroque style, which is neat. I love Baroque. So after 1771, there was a really big shift in Goya's career. He kind of rose to prominence very quickly. He received his first Madrilean commission for a set of tapestry cartoons in 1775, and after this, his ascent was pretty fast. By 1780, he was elected to the Academy of San Fernando, and by 1786, he was named court painter. In 1789, the year of Charles IV's coronation, he was promoted to the position of Pintor de Camara, which translates to camera painter, and basically means that he was the main artist appointed to do royal or court commissions. I'll flash through a couple of his court paintings right here as I go through this, but we notice a couple of things. This work is very optimistic. It's very beautiful. It's very colorful. It's traditional master work. It's work that is meant to reflect the highest order in the highest esteem. He wanted to represent the royal family and the court surrounding them in the best possible light. And these commissions were obviously big money, so you want to do those well, and you want to do them colorfully. As a court painter, he was heavily involved in the political scene, and while his work reflected the greatness of those around him, it's unlikely that he completely agreed with the political scene that he was involved in. I'd like to take this opportunity to shout out Fred Licht, who is the writer and editor of these two books right here, which were huge in the researching process for this video. So I'd like to take the opportunity to read a quote from one of these books, and it is Goya, The Origins of Modern Temper in Art by Fred Licht. And the quote says, "It is also this disparity between Goya the artist and Goya the man that gives his biography a startlingly modern note. Just as Picasso could paint Guernica and come to terms with the German occupation of France, just as Manet could paint the execution of Emperor Maximilian and hope for public recognition and remuneration, so Goya lived simultaneously with and against the dominant trends of his time. To determine the nexus between the life and work of a modern artist is a risky business indeed." So we're already seeing early steps into how Goya was an extremely modern artist. Even as the last great master and working in such a traditional field, his sort of disassociation with the politics that he was heavily involved with, separating Goya the person from Goya the painter, is one of the first modern ideals that we notice. It's very modern to have a separate ideology and a separate character from your work. And Goya is one of the first people that we really notice this in. Now, most of what I've shown you today is painting, and that's pretty much what we're going to focus on because Goya is pretty much totally remembered for his painting. But As we move on and we talk about this shift in his life, I would like to talk about one specific work, and that is, bam, The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. This work was kind of a critical turning point in his career. It's where we really started to notice the pessimism, darkness, seriousness, and weight of his work. This is sort of a visual shift of what is about to come. In taking a look at this work, we have a sleeping man leaning on a stool. In the background, we have a collection of owls, bats, cats, fairly devious and typically known as night creatures. The sort of piercing gaze and deep darkness that is coming out of this piece feels haunting. The large bat that hovers over the primary character, almost directly in the center of the page, here, is terrifying. It's huge. It hovers over the character in a way that seems extremely ominous. Goya really started to reflect his newfound pessimism by displaying the brutality of the Peninsular War of 1804 to 1814. While Goya's involvement with the court of Joseph I is unknown, he stayed neutral during the war. He created a series of gruesome and truly horrid paintings. They're brilliant paintings, but while war scenes have typically been staged in a sort of romantic recreation of what goes on in war, Goya really showed the dark, harsh reality of war. The two that I want to focus are this one and this one. Now, I can shift interchangeably between these two paintings as I talk about them, but the big thing to take away here is just the chaos. Even the most ordered things in this painting feel quickly organized and very dark. There's a whole lot of loss of life. There's death shown in a way that isn't romanticized at all. It's really a truly brutal depiction of what war is. And as far as paintings go, it's one of the first depictions of what war actually is. Again, we have so many romanticized or staged scenes from war in the past that kind of glamorized a victory or were meant to pay tribute to one of those who were lost. But Goya plainly and deliberately shows the darkness of war. On top of his near-fatal illness and being in a country ravaged by war, Goya's wife passed away in 1812. I really couldn't catch a break for a couple years. Records of Goya's later life are minimal, and it's believed he felt alienated by the politics and trends that followed 1814. What we do know, however, is that he secluded himself to a farmhouse outside of Madrid that he converted into a studio. The studio would later become known as La Quinta del Sordo, or the House of the Deaf Man. And this is where my personal favorite Goya works and the darkest Goya works. I'll flash through the black paintings quickly because you undoubtedly know this one. But there's a whole collection of work, and they have a overarching story behind all of them, and it's really dark, and it really speaks to the kind of sad creation of this body of work. At the age of 75, alone and frail both mentally and physically, Goya created a series of 14 paintings directly onto the plaster walls of his home. These are the paintings that would later become known as the black paintings. He never intended for them to be seen, he never wrote of them, and he never spoke of them. This is perhaps the first modern body of work as far as Goya is concerned. We talked about the sort of parody of Goya the painter and Goya the person and how that made him one of the first modern idealists. There's a huge shift in the way that he went about creating the black paintings, where before he was a court painter working on commissions, these paintings were created almost entirely for the artist. As it said, he never wrote of these paintings. He literally never spoke of them. They were created entirely for him. That one that I talked about that you've undoubtedly heard of, Saturn devouring his son, was actually painted in his living room. These paintings are incredibly gestural. We see a looseness and a heavily exposed stroke that we haven't seen in Goya's painting before. As I said, he was one of the last true masters, and one of the primary traits of master painters is that they can brilliantly represent real life. The softness at which they can display real life is something that nothing short of a camera could do. Like I said, his title at one point was literally camera painter. This is a frail, lonely old man who's lost a lot of faith in life, and he created raw and gruesome, scary, haunting work. I'll give a specific spotlight to the two main works that you've undoubtedly heard of from this series. The first is Saturn Devouring His Son, as I've already mentioned. There is a great tension to this piece. Nerdwriter does an amazing video where he talks specifically about this painting. I wanted to give him a shout out because it was crucial for the research to this painting. But he highlighted how the main character almost appears as if a light came around the corner and surprised him. His gaze is surprised, but it does not halt the act that he's doing. If we look to the specific myth of why Saturn is devouring his son, he typically devours his son whole. And the two main works that we look to represent these scenes are this one by Goya and another by Peter Paul Rubens. Both of these paintings are far more gruesome than the tale typically tells. I'll flash to Rubens's for just a moment, and we can see that in this one it appears that Saturn is sucking the life out of his son. But in Goya's representation, we see that he is gnawing at him, literally biting away, his grip so tense that he's breaking into the skin of the character's back. It's really haunting. It's quite a scary painting, and it's probably why, if you have any recognition of Goya, this is the one that you've seen before. The other big one from this series that a lot of people have heard of, that I'll highlight just because it is a recognizable Goya work, is this one, Witch's Sabbath. Now, this is of the longer and far more organized work in the series. In this painting, we have a black, humanoid-like goat speaking to a crowd of people. Now, the interesting thing about this work for me is the haunted expressions on the character's face. If you pan through the crowd of people, you see a lot of different expressions, a lot of terror, a lot of confusion. The expressions that we see in the characters speak a lot to what Goya was feeling at the time of creating these works. A lot of confusion, a lot of fear, which could be a representation of what Goya feared and hated about what was happening to the world in front of him. The final painting from this series that I'd like to highlight is the one that has been particularly the most haunting for me. I don't think this painting gets a lot of mainstream attention because it's not as exciting as something like Saturn Devouring His Son. But this guy, Two Men Eating Soup. I've also heard of it referred to as Two Women, but there's another painting in the series called Two Women Laughing. So I assume that that's just some sort of miscommunication in labeling. But if we take a look at this one, we see the main character. We have a smiling, we'll call it man for the sake of the titling that I'm using. He has a really, we'll say disfigured, but just kind of ugly, scary face. He looks like the witch from Snow White. It's gruesome. He does not appear to have any teeth. He's making a scary face, but it's not something that's intentionally scary. It's just a representation of something not beautiful. And in painting, especially around this time, what we saw in painting was things that were meant to seem beautiful. And to see such a striking character that is so ghostly is something that we haven't really seen before. And something that I don't think Goya really meant to be seen, but something that he wanted to represent. And that brings us to the other character. And I find it kind of strange that no one mentions that this guy basically looks like a skull. If you look at the angle of his nose, it could just be that he has huge nostrils, and it could be a misrepresentation on my part of the looseness and strokey way that these characters were painted, but he looks dead. He has a sort of falling shape, and the way that you see the lack of features in his face really makes these characters represent something sinister and something dark. I'd like to wrap up by talking about why the black paintings are so amazing and so important for modern art. And it's mainly the idea that they were painted for no one. These are some of the first paintings that we have, or that we see a lot of, that are almost entirely representations of what an artist was feeling. This series of work is a shift in art where we go from commissions, depictions of royalty, biblical scenes, the traditional and classical imagery that we've come to know, to where work becomes largely modern. A reflection of the artist rather than what they've been paid to paint. Goya really changed the art world with the black paintings, and it was entirely unintentional. He gave a peek inside of his life, his character, the darkness that he was feeling inside of him, and he changed art for the better. Now, there are some later Goyas that come after his death, but we're keeping it broad strokes here on Crit Day because we got to cram a lot of information into a relatively small amount of time. But I think when we look at the grand scope of Goya's work, the Peninsular War paintings are incredibly important because they represent the shift from optimism to pessimism and the beginnings of seeing Goya's true character in his work. And the black paintings change the idea of making art as people understood it at the time, because these weren't for anybody. They might not even have been for Goya. They were his way of expressing what he was feeling in life. And with that, there comes a new looseness and a new expression, things that we're going to see a lot of in later art with things like Expressionism and Impressionism. Thank you so much for watching the second episode of Crit Day. If you liked it, leave a thumbs up down below, comment on who I should do next or what I could do to make this video series better, and subscribe to Plebeian for more Crit Day and more great content. If you'd like to hear more of my voice, you can check out the Plebeian podcast, which is going to be released once a week moving forward. You can check out plebeian.us to find the Prime Cut section where I, along with several other great contributors, write daily. I release interviews and features with all sorts of awesome artists, and you can also check that out on Instagram at primecuts.mag. For everything Plebeian, follow at plebeian_us on Instagram. I have been Forrest Hines. You can find me on Instagram at ForrestHinesArt, and I hope to see you in a couple weeks. Thank you.